Good morning, everyone, and good morning to our audience at St. Edward the Confessor in Clifton Park. Welcome to St. Mary's Oneonta. I'm Father David Mickiewicz, and today we continue our Lent for Real Life 3. Our speaker this morning is Deacon Greg Kendra. He comes to us from New York City area. He is a deacon of the Diocese of Brooklyn. Greg is the multimedia editor for the Catholic Near East Welfare Association. It's a pontifical agency founded by Pope Pius XI in 1926, and he will talk about that later on. You may be familiar, though, with Greg's work. He worked for many years at CBS, working with 60 Minutes, Sunday Morning, with Katie Couric. Whether that was a plus or not on his resume, we won't say. His writings appear in Give Us This Day, which we have here at St. Mary's, and you may have come across his name, as well as his writings have appeared in America, a U.S. Catholic, and Catholic Digest. His compatriot is Chris Kennedy, who also comes from Catholic Near East Welfare Association. He is their development officer, and he has a lot of freebies over there that I hope you take advantage of before you leave today. So without further ado, Greg, welcome among us, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Well, first I want to thank Father Dave for his incredible warm and gracious welcome. We had a wonderful time last night and an incredible drive up from New York. Once you get over the bridge and you start seeing those mountains and the rivers and everything, you know you're not in New York City anymore. So it's a real joy to be here and to be able to share this with you. As he mentioned, I am from the Diocese of Brooklyn. I don't sound that way because I was actually born and raised in Maryland. But Queens is my home now. I'm deacon at Our Lady Queen of Martyrs in Forest Hills. I know the theme of the talks that you've been having is Lent for Real Life. And this morning I'm going to talk about people for whom all of life is Lent. All of life is a sacrifice and sometimes a very difficult ordeal. They are the people, the men, the women, and children of the Middle East, particularly Syria and Iraq, who are suffering terribly right now. I'm going to talk about them in just a little bit. And I'm also going to talk about my own journey and how I got to be where I am today. But first, a brief word about CNEWA, Catholic Near East Welfare Association, or as we call it, CNEWA. As Father mentioned, we are a papal agency. We were founded in 1926 by Pope Pius XI. We work with, for, and through the local churches of the Middle East, Northeast Africa, India, and parts of Eastern Europe. We were actually founded in the wake of World War I to help support the people and the churches of what was known then as the Near East. Our work is humanitarian, but also pastoral. We exist to express the Holy Father's love and concern for the people who are under such strain right now, especially the poor. As our mission statement puts it, we connect you to our brothers and sisters in need. Together, we build up the church, affirm human dignity, alleviate poverty, encourage dialogue, and inspire hope. We see this again and again and again. It is there in every child who is educated, every seminarian we are able to form, every struggling family whose life is somehow enhanced and uplifted and given dignity because of the generosity of our benefactors. In so many ways, that is the fuel that keeps all of us going. When I was ordained 9 years ago, I bought a set of deacon stoles in different colors for the liturgical seasons. And every one has woven onto the front of it the Jerusalem cross. If you're familiar with it, it's a cross with 4 smaller crosses, and it represents the 4 wounds of Christ from Calvary. The deacon, as minister of the precious blood, as the one who distributes the chalice during Mass, has an intimate connection to those wounds and to the precious blood that flows from them. So during Mass and any liturgy in which I serve, those wounds are on the fabric that crosses my chest. They are always close to my heart. And the wounds of the body of Christ, I know, are close to everyone in this room this morning, particularly during Lent, when we reflect more deeply upon Christ's passion, death, and resurrection. This morning, I wanted to take some time to speak in a very personal and direct way about the suffering body of Christ in the Middle East, especially in places that are giving rise to modern martyrs: Syria, Iraq, and parts of Lebanon. These places, too, are part of the Holy Land, part of our heritage as Catholic Christians, and they are under threat as never before. What is happening in these places is having an impact not only in the places involved, but on everyone in this room and on so many others who are not here. It has been said before by more than a few people that we live in an age of terror, and that is what is fueling what is happening in that part of the world. So I wanted to begin our time together by telling you some of my own experience with terror. This is really the story of how I got here and why my life's work is now so closely entwined with our brothers and sisters in the Middle East. To begin with, people are often surprised at my long history at CBS News. For 26 years, I was a writer and producer at CBS. As Father mentioned, I worked at 60 Minutes 2, Sunday morning. My last job was as a writer for the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric. CBS is not really known as being a laboratory for Catholic clergy. It's not exactly where Catholic clergy spring up. And I'm probably the only man in history who went from working for Katie Couric to working for the Pope. But my story, I hope, helps to tell our story, the story of a people on pilgrimage, a journey of faith. It is also the story of answering a call. The first words that God speaks in all of Scripture speak to us today. Let there be light. These words call forth hope. They summon possibility. God couldn't begin creating the universe until there was light. It made everything possible. And I think we cannot continue God's work of creation in the world and fulfilling his plan for us without being light. That is Genesis. And now let me tell you a little bit about my Genesis, my own beginning. My journey here today really began on an otherwise ordinary late summer morning, September the 11th, 2001. It was supposed to be just another ordinary Tuesday. I had taken the subway into Manhattan from my home in Queens, and I got off at Columbus Circle, as I always did, and began walking to my office. And I stopped at a convenience store on West 58th Street to pick up a few things. And I was mentally checking off all the things that I had to do that day. We were about to start a new season. The fall premiere was about to happen. There were shows that, or pieces that I had to screen. My job back then at 60 Minutes 2 was essentially being the rewrite guy. My title was story producer, but it meant that I helped to write the scripts, to shape them, and also did a lot of work writing and producing promos for the show. I stopped at this convenience store for a few minutes, and I came out, and I noticed that there was a crowd of people gathered around the back of a delivery truck. Someone had taken a small portable TV and set it up, and people were gathering around to watch. I could hear the volume blaring, and I went over to see what was going on. And I saw the images that are all burned into our memories today of those two towers and the smoke billowing out of them. I knew that something horrible had happened that was going to change my life for at least that day and maybe beyond. So I started walking to my office 2 blocks away and then began jogging. I got to work and I ended up spending the next 14 hours sitting in a small glass room off of the newsroom, writing updates that Dan Rather read on the air, every hour on the hour, all day long, going into the next morning. We finally went off the air at 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember watching the images of those towers falling again and again and again. And I remember the first words Dan Rather spoke on the CBS Evening News that night. "Good evening," he said. "This is a day you will remember for the rest of your life." As I mentioned, we stayed on the air until 1 o'clock in the morning. What a lot of people may not realize is New York went into shutdown, and there was no way for any of us to get home, to leave Manhattan that night. All the bridges and tunnels were closed. The buses and subways, trains had stopped running. So CBS began putting us up in hotels. They reserved blocks of rooms all over the city. So a little after 1 o'clock, a group of us decided to walk to our hotel. It was about a mile away at the Sheraton on 6th Avenue. So we started walking, and it was an absolutely beautiful late summer night. But it was eerie because it was so quiet. There was no traffic. The traffic lights at every intersection were blinking. And I noticed on every street corner, there were soldiers. We got to Broadway and crossed Broadway without even looking for traffic. And I remember looking down at Times Square about a half a mile south. And I was stunned. It was completely black. Every light, every marquee, every neon sign had been turned off. I learned later that was the first time that had happened since World War II. They were so concerned about another attack that the entire downtown area went dark. Well, we made it to our hotel and I checked in. And I slept fitfully and woke up the next morning and I had that disorienting sensation of where am I and what had just happened? And it all came back to me. So I got up and I went to the window to look out, and it was another incredible, beautiful September day, September the 12th, 2001. And it was exactly like the day before. And I looked down and people were walking up and down the street. There was traffic. It was almost as if nothing had happened. And I thought to myself, was this all just a bad dream? But of course, it wasn't. I went downstairs to check out. And while I was at the front desk, that was when I noticed him. As I was checking out, a fireman was checking in. He was still wearing his boots and his heavy coat and his helmet, but you could barely see them. He was covered head to foot in ash. And as he stood there, some of it flaked off and fell to the floor. I realized probably for the first time what we were up against, what had really happened. The full impact of it, that moment, hit me. In the days and weeks that followed, I kept remembering that man, remembering where he had been, remembering what he must have seen, remembering all the people we had lost. Those of us who were in New York that day, during that time, will never forget it. You could not get away from it. Every memorial service, every fireman's funeral, every candlelight vigil brought it all back. And even in weeks afterward, I would be at a bus stop waiting for a bus, and you would see missing posters still scotch taped saying, "Have you seen them?" It was like it was never going to end. It was always there. And in the middle of all of this, as every day passed, I found myself turning more and more to my faith. I had been sort of a casual Catholic for much of my life. I went to Mass, I received the sacraments, I did all the usual things, but my faith had not really been a priority to me. After September 11th, it was, because I realized that everything that I had could be gone in a matter of moments. About a week after the attack on the Trade Center, I lived about 10 miles east of Manhattan in Forest Hills, and walking down the street, people were stopping and saying, "Do you smell that?" The huge cloud of lower Manhattan had drifted over to us, and you couldn't see it, but you could smell the strange, acrid aroma. It was the residue of the attack. So I began praying more deeply and thinking more seriously about my faith, and thinking, for all that I had done, all the awards that I had collected, all the incredible people I had met, the experiences I had had, something else was expected of me. It had to be something else, because life was too fleeting. There had to be more. I began reading and praying. I discovered Thomas Merton. I began making a number of retreats to a Trappist monastery, and 5 years later, I found myself where I never expected to be, face down on a basilica floor, being ordained a deacon. About a year later, I made the decision to leave CBS. I really wanted to work for the church. My last job, as I said, was working as a writer for Katie Couric. It was a very difficult time. The ratings for the show were terrible. The news reports were terrible. There was all sorts of gossip and speculation that Katie wasn't going to be long for the job. It was very demoralizing, and that made the decision to leave a lot easier. So I started looking around. I wanted to use what I had learned from Ed Bradley and Charles Kuralt and Dan Rather and so many great, great journalists to do something new. Don Hewitt, the legendary creator of 60 Minutes, once said that the reason that show was so successful could be boiled down to four little words. Four words, he said, that every child knows. Tell me a story. I wanted to tell a different story. I wanted to tell a story of hope. In a world covered in ash, I wanted to tell a story of light. Let there be light. And that led me to Catholic Near East Welfare Association. It has been an amazing journey, and it is far from over. And there is a big part of me that believes that the most important work of my life is just getting started. Working at CBS gave me a front row seat to some of the most amazing stories of my time. The fall of the Berlin Wall, Tiananmen Square, the LA riots, the Oklahoma City bombing, Hurricane Katrina, and of course, 9/11. But after leaving the news business, I now find myself once again in the middle of one of the most important stories of my time. Maybe the most important one. Not as a witness, not as a reporter, but as someone working on behalf of those affected by it. As I mentioned at the beginning, it is a story that has far-reaching implications for everyone in this room. I am speaking of the systematic persecution of Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. What Pope Francis himself has called nothing less than a genocide. 2,000 years ago, the sands of Syria and Iraq were the sacred ground on which apostles walked. It is where the first Christians were baptized, where the first epistles were proclaimed, where the first congregations of believers gathered to build churches and build up the body of Christ. And it is where today the descendants of those first believers are literally running for their lives. I saw what pure evil did to my home, New York, on 9/11. And I'm seeing it again today in the places that are the cradle of my faith. At last report, over 130,000 children, women, and men had been displaced from Iraq, literally running for their lives, fleeing at the end of a sword. Mothers, fathers, the young, the old, the infirm. A region that has known exodus and suffering, enslavement, and martyrdom is seeing it all happen again. The roots of this crisis go very deep, and I can't puzzle it out for you this morning. But the world first began to see the horrifying effects of it on August the 6th, 2014, a date which should live in infamy. On that day, the world so many people knew came to an end as the soldiers of the Islamic State, ISIS, rolled into towns and villages and began taking over homes, began taking over businesses. They demanded that people, almost all of them Christian, either convert or pay a heavy tax or die. Fearing for their lives, many of them fled. You'll notice I'm wearing this pin this morning. There is a story behind it. When ISIS moved into northern Iraq, they would mark the homes of Christians with this emblem. It is the Arabic letter N, or Non, and it stands for Nazarene. The homes that were marked with this emblem are followers of the Nazarene, the followers of Jesus of Nazareth. They are Christians. They are marked for persecution. Many people have compared it to the Star of David that was utilized during the Holocaust. I wear this today as a sign of solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the Middle East, because I too am a Nazarene. I too am a Christian, and I stand with them and beside them. If I were in the Middle East, God only knows what would be happening to me right now. Many of the people who fled, we will never know their names or their stories, but I want to share some of those we do know. There is Ghanem Yadago. Ghanem Yadago was blinded by shrapnel in the Iran-Iraq War, and he was living quietly with his wife and children in Mosul in northern Iraq. On August the 6th, they got word that the soldiers of ISIS were getting closer, and if they wanted to live, they had to run. They made their way to a safe haven, Erbil, in Kurdistan, northern part of Iraq. Ghanem now lives in the basement of a church hall, a room not that different from the one we're in right now, that has been subdivided with plastic sheets to create small, semi-private living areas. He lives there with just a cot and the clothes on his back. His wife and his children are staying at a refugee camp several miles away. The facility where Ghanem is to care for the infirm, the sick, and the disabled. But every day, faithfully, Ghanem's wife makes the journey from that refugee camp to his small cell in Erbil, and she sits with him, and she holds his hand, and for a few minutes, both of them are a little bit less alone. Then there are the religious, priests, brothers, and sisters. There are people like Sister Maria Hanna, the Mother Superior of the Dominican Sisters of St. Catherine of Siena in Karakush, Iraq. On August the 6th, she was awakened in the middle of the night by a knock on her convent door. Once again, someone was saying, "The soldiers are coming, you've got to go." She threw on her clothes, she grabbed a passport and a rosary, she awakened all the other sisters in the convent, and before she left, she ran down the hall to the convent chapel, fell to her knees, and wept. She prayed for her sisters. She prayed for her country, She prayed for all the people who were going to be suffering. And then she got up and ran. Sister Maria Hanna and 40 of her nuns made their way to Erbil, about 50 miles away. Much of that journey they made on foot. They slept in open fields, sometimes beside open sewers, until they finally reached a safe haven. Now, a year and a half later, they're living in a half-finished office building. That is their convent, their church, their headquarters. That is the place they call home. This is the new normal for so many people in Iraq who have been displaced. They live in tents or in prefab containers or in basements of unfinished buildings. Sometimes 3 or 4 families are crowded into small apartments. This is the new normal. All of these people are bound together by one thing. There is one thing they all have in common. This is happening because they believe in Jesus Christ. This is happening to them because they are Christian, and they cannot turn their back on their faith. Given the opportunity to do so, they would not, they could not. They are, in some ways, the lucky ones. They made it out alive, and so many others did not. On that September morning when I saw that fireman in the lobby of my hotel, I thought, my God, this is the world that we live in now. What has happened? The world is burning, and we're left to ask, what will be left? Is it all just going to be ashes? Well, I'm here today to tell you, no. By the grace of God, no. What will be left, what remains and endures and prevails even now in spite of everything, is faith. Courageous and unwavering faith. The faith of martyrs, the faith of modern-day saints. Again and again, when these people tell their stories, what emerges is their sure and unquestioning belief that God is with them. They are not alone. They trust and they hope. They don't weep in the ashes. They turn toward the light. Let there be light. It is there. It persists despite every effort to block it out. These people have faith that will not be extinguished. It is brilliant and it is beautiful. And the story of their survival is a story of the triumph of faith. Last April, I had the great privilege of visiting Jordan. And our group saw some of the holy sites. We saw the site of Jesus' baptism. We went to Petra. We saw where Moses first beheld the promised land at Mount Nebo. But probably the most memorable moment was a visit to the Italian hospital in Amman, Jordan. It is a Catholic facility in a country that is overwhelmingly Muslim. I think 95% of Jordan is Muslim. Most of the patients there are Muslim, being treated by Christians, and many of them are very poor. But I couldn't help but notice that in spite of the overwhelming Muslim population and the Muslim population of the patients, the gospel is being proclaimed in every room. In every room of that hospital, there was a crucifix. In the nursery, there were images of Mary and the baby Jesus. And there are 2 nuns who work at the hospital and who visit with every patient and who witness to our faith day after day. They are the face of Christ to anyone who comes into that hospital. One of the patients I met was a Christian named Agnan. He was also a refugee who had fled Mosul. At another time in another life, before everything went to hell, Agnan was an auto repairman. He was 62 years old, just a few years older than me, but he looked old enough to be my father. He was being treated for heart disease and stress. He told me through a translator about how ISIS had marked his home with this letter, the Arabic letter N. And they gave him the choice, as they gave everyone: convert, pay a tax, or die. They gave him some time to think about it, and he took that time to escape. He ran. Unfortunately, they caught him. He pleaded for his life. He gave them everything that he had, every piece of money, every piece of documentation, every identity that he had. He turned it all over to them, and they let him go. Somehow he was able to make his way to Jordan. And his dream, he told me in the hospital, one that I don't think he will ever be able to fulfill, is to join his daughter who is living in California. But the immigration system, the refugee system being what it is, that dream, if it's ever going to be fulfilled, is years away. He will probably spend the rest of his life, however long it might be, in Jordan. I asked him if he wanted to go back to Iraq, and he said no. They took our churches, he said. They took our homes, our work, everything. We cannot go back. And I asked him then what sustained him. And he answered with one word: prayer. He said, I pray to our Father and I pray to Our Lady, and that makes everything bearable. There are so many stories like his. I told you a little while ago about Sister Maria Hannah and her sisters. They didn't just arrive in Erbil and wait for instructions, wait for someone to tell them what to do. They set about immediately doing what they were consecrated to do, ministering to the men, women, and children who are in the same boat they were in, displaced, people who are homeless, but not hopeless. They set about being the face of Christ to others. Last August, 1 year after her exile began, Sister Maria Hannah wrote a letter to all of her friends around the world, updating them on what was happening. She wrote of how God had made the impossible possible. She described distributing blankets, mattresses, milk, and shoes to some 10,000 families. Those sisters opened 2 kindergartens. A year later, they were preparing to open a primary school. The aim throughout, she wrote, is to show the love and care of the church for her children. And then she added something that still moves me so deeply. Since winter, she wrote, some of our sisters have been preparing 400 children for First Communion. The sisters will start preparing another 100 children for First Communion in towns and villages in Erbil and Dohuk. Think of that. In the midst of all that pain and all of that suffering, they have the Eucharist. In the midst of so much death, they have the bread of life. Just a few months ago, my boss, Monsignor Kozar, made a pastoral visit to Iraq. And when he came back, he told of meeting one 12-year-old girl who looked up at him and she said, they've taken everything. They have taken our homes, but they will never take our faith. This is what it is all about. At CNEWA, Kanewa, we are working hard to keep the flames of faith alive in these people, nurturing them with hope in whatever way we can. Hope that is rooted not just in faith, but also in works. In Kurdistan, we are supporting schools and orphanages, but that is just the beginning. We are funding a mobile clinic founded by a Syriac Catholic priest. It travels across the countryside offering medicine and health care to people who are either too afraid to go to a doctor or don't know how to get to one, or they can't afford it. Many of these displaced are living in poor, remote villages. But this mobile clinic now visits 22 villages and serves 15,000 people. For many, it is the only health care they will ever get. It is helping babies to be born healthy. It is helping the elderly suffering from heart disease and cancer. And it is helping stem the tide of illness and disease that is sweeping through the area from people who are living in substandard human conditions so often. Not all of these people, I should mention, are Catholic. Many of them are Yazidis, another minority being persecuted, but a number of them are also Muslims, because Muslims are also being victimized and targeted by the Islamic State. And this clinic cares for all of them, regardless of their affiliation. I'm reminded of what a sister in Iraq said during the Iraq War in 2003. When the US-led invasion was underway and they were bombing Baghdad, the neighbors at a particular convent were all Muslim and they were terrified. But the nun who runs the convent invited the Muslims to come and stay with the nuns there, because they knew, please God, they probably were not going to bomb a convent full of nuns. So the Muslims came in and the nuns gave them a special room where they could pray, and they were safe. And when she explained it, the nun said, "We don't take care of them because they're Catholic. We take care of them because we are. This is who we are. This is reflecting the face on the love of Christ for our neighbors, being Samaritans. And it's probably the most powerful witness that could be given, because those people who lived with those nuns for a short time will never forget who protected them and who cared for them. Today in Kurdistan, countless non-Christians and Christians are finding solace and comfort and hope because of the generosity and love of a Catholic priest who started that clinic. Still, we cannot forget that under the Islamic State, it is overwhelmingly the Christians who are being targeted and persecuted and suffering. These stories no longer dominate the headlines the way they did a year or two ago, but it is still happening. The suffering still goes on. Don Hewitt said, "Tell me a story." Speaking this morning as a journalist and as a clergyman and as a Christian, let me say, we need to tell this story. We need to remind the world of what is happening to Christians in Iraq and Syria and throughout the Middle East. The entire region is being affected by this, as refugees pour into Lebanon and Jordan, finding a safe haven wherever they can. The land that we call holy is trembling, reeling after blow after blow after blow. The economies are being hugely impacted, and both Lebanon and Jordan are saying, we can't take any more. We are being overwhelmed by these people. The economies in these countries are suffering. People are afraid to visit. The tourism industry, which was once a backbone for all of these countries, has dried up because people are so afraid to visit. A great exodus is underway. Those who can get out are just leaving completely. And an important presence, a Christian presence, in the land where Christianity was born is beginning to disappear. We need to tell this story. I know it's not easy, especially at a time when the world seems consumed with every word that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. He is sucking up all the oxygen, and other stories don't have any room to be told. But we cannot forget these people. We need to persevere. We need to help these Christians persevere, and we need to be present for them. During this year of mercy, we can do nothing more meaningful than to be mercy for these people. Think of the works of mercy, particularly those works that can support and uplift Christians in Jordan, Iraq, and Syria. Donate to feed these hungry and give drink to those who thirst. And remember, there are many kinds of hunger and thirst. Our brothers and sisters in the Middle East hunger and thirst for safety, for justice, for education, for shelter. They are starving for peace. I ask you humbly to join us at Kanewa in our mission, this mission of mercy. Kanewa is a lifeline for so many, and I'll just mention three significant ways, three touchstones, if you will. First, as I mentioned at the start, we are a papal agency. We work for the Pope. We are his eyes and ears, his hands and his feet. We express his love for and solidarity with the poor. Secondly, we work with, for, and through the local churches, and we are unique in how we do this. We don't just fly into a disaster, throw money at it, and leave. We have regional offices. Some of them have been there for decades. We're now marking our 90th anniversary. So we have long-standing relationships with the local churches, congregations, religious institutions, hospitals, orphanages, you name it. So we very often find out before anybody else what the particular needs are. It might be something as simple as baby formula and diapers, or it might be something as complicated as finding psychotherapy for a child who has been traumatized by war. The bottom line is that Kanewa gives those things that you can see, like health care and food and shelter, but also those things that you can't see: spiritual support, education, encouragement, building up of faith, perhaps most importantly, the sustaining of hope. Thirdly, we are very efficient. 88 cents out of every dollar goes directly to the people and programs we support. This is almost unheard of in the world of charitable giving. And in fact, Charity Navigator, the watchdog group that oversees organizations like ours, has given us their highest rating, 4 stars, which means that you can bet your top dollar that every dollar is going exactly where it needs to go and is directly helping those who need to be helped. This is all just the tip of the iceberg, but we have more information in the back. My colleague Chris has flyers, copies of our magazine. I do want to give a quick shout out. Our magazine, someone has described this as National Geographic for Catholics, and I'm not going to dispute that. It is beautiful. Every year this wins the top prize from the Catholic Press Association. And it tells stories that no one else is telling about what is happening in these parts of the world, a way of life that is disappearing, and the efforts of Kanewa to try and preserve it, and to give people hope, and to sustain them and uplift them. I'm very proud to be one of the editors of this, and very proud to have my name attached to it. So please pick up a copy, and if you can, sign up to get a subscription. It comes out 4 times a year. We also have a lot of material online. I'm the multimedia editor, the online editor for CNEWA, so I supervise everything that goes out on our blog and that goes out on emails and things like that. All of this is profoundly urgent and profoundly important, and it can be easy to forget these people when their stories are not on the front page anymore. But as someone who works intimately with this, I can tell you it isn't really getting any better. There is so much that needs to be done. Perhaps most importantly, we need to remember all of these people in our prayers. Pray for comfort for those who are mourning. Pray for strength for those who are frightened. Pray for compassion for those who feel helpless or weak or forgotten. Pray for Ghanem Yadago and his wife and his family. Pray for Sister Maria Hannah and her sisters and so many others like them who are doing the work of Christ day after day after day. Pray for children who are living with the scars of war, scars that no one can see, in a land where war is almost a way of life. Pray for those for whom life is every day an ongoing and never-ending Lent. Pray above all for peace. One of the popular hymns we sing during this time of year, you often hear it during the Triduum, is Lift High the Cross. We usually only sing 1 or 2 verses in my parish, and then we get on with the liturgy. But I think there are 7 or 8 verses, and not long ago I attended a mass where they sang every single verse, and I was struck by these words. Peace was your plea, and peace your loving theme. Let peace be our passport, peace a living dream. Let there be peace. Let there be light. It is there. I have seen it for myself. It bursts through the darkness and the ashes. It is there in the sisters teaching children how to pray the rosary. It is there in the relief workers providing food and medicine, and the doctors and the nurses who are helping mothers give birth to healthy babies. It is there in seminarians who are studying to serve these people. It is there in the uplifted prayers of countless men and women around the world, including all of us here in this room. Every person, a communion of believers. We are doing what others cannot, and in fact, we are doing what so many are being punished and persecuted for doing, proclaiming our belief and our faith in Jesus Christ. It all comes back to what I mentioned before. Faith. This is what will survive the terror and the tears and the ashes of our age. Faith. Faith engenders hope, and it is hope, as St. Paul said, that does not disappoint. Hope which enables our brothers and sisters in the Middle East not to dwell on the never-ending Lent that is their life, but to turn their eyes toward Easter Sunday and the promise and the hope of the resurrection. You know, as a deacon, part of my job is to proclaim the gospel at Mass. But every one of us proclaims that gospel with our presence and with our prayers, with our sacrifice and devotion to this land we call holy. We can all be heralds of the gospel. We can all be heralds of hope. In an age of terror and of fear, there can be no greater calling. I want to conclude where I started this talk, in the beginning, with Genesis. God's first words at the dawn of creation are his words to us today. Words to uplift and heal a broken world. Let there be light. That is our call during this penitential season of Lent. It is our call every day as Christians. Let us deepen our resolve to fulfill that command. Let there be light. Let us be light. Thank you, and God bless you. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Yes?
Partner at all with Catholic Relief Services?
A little bit, yes. They deal almost strictly in humanitarian work, where ours is humanitarian and pastoral. And most of what we try to do is to work with, for, and through the local churches, particularly the Eastern churches, which I know Father Dave is very familiar with. to try and facilitate the ministry that they do and give them support. Yes?
This right now has to do with that show I saw last night on the Middle East, that girl, she won the Nobel Prize.
Malala.
Malala, thank you. You know, I watched the show up until they bombed her school and nearly killed her. You know, but this is what this is about, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Persecution of innocent people. And throughout the world, our mission at CNEWA, Kanewa, is to stand beside those who are being victimized and persecuted and who are suffering, and to try and alleviate and help them, alleviate their suffering and help them.
Do you think there's any compassion from a vast majority of Muslims towards the work that is being done? Or is it still convert or be builder? And I'm not even sure what this pay the fines, whether how long that lasts.
My understanding is that for many, many centuries, Christians and Muslims and Jews have been able to live fairly peaceably side by side in these parts of the world. And it's only been fairly recently that radical extremism has taken root, and this one splinter group of the Islamic State is, starting to dominate everything. You will hear people say that Islam isn't like that. Some branches of Islam are more extreme, as are some branches of Christianity, and some branches of Judaism also. And unfortunately, the extremists, the fundamentalists, if you will, often have the megaphone and make the loudest noise. One thing that does not get reported very much is that the work of the Islamic State, if you want to call it work, has been resoundingly condemned by many Muslim leaders all around the world. It is not being reported, and that is a tragic oversight. One of the loudest voices and one of our biggest allies is the King of Jordan, who is himself a Muslim, and in fact, he is a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. And he has said the Islamic State does not speak for Islam. It is not part of us, and there are many people who would label the Islamic State heretics because of what they're doing and how they're doing it and how they are violating parts of Islamic law. We can only hope that, as this has gone on and continues to go on, that more people will step forward and more people will listen and come to their senses.
Even with the beheadings that took place a while ago, there wasn't that great outcry from the Muslim communities in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because it's
Or,
reported?
well, part of the problem with Islam, it's not like the Catholic Church. You don't have a traditional hierarchy. You don't have just one person who speaks. They speak for different factions and different groups. But if you take the time and Google Muslim condemnation of ISIS, you'll be amazed at what you find. And there's been a lot of very authoritative and important statements that have been put out, but unfortunately it doesn't get publicized very well. And very often it is from small groups, sometimes it's from larger ones, and it just doesn't get the attention. And it's tragic because it's creating this terrible misunderstanding that Muslims are supporting ISIS, and a great many of them are not. And unfortunately, that's, with the political season right now, a lot of that is playing out also with what we're hearing, with some of the candidates and what they're having to say about Muslims and so forth. It's a mess. Father Dave.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you to those at St. Edward's and here at St. Mary's for attending and listening to Greg. There was, I think, part of, just to piggyback for a moment on what Greg was talking about in Grace's question, there was a wonderful episode a couple Christmases ago where Muslims stood hand in hand around the Coptic Orthodox Cathedral so the Christians could celebrate the Feast of Christmas undisturbed and without violence. And those are the kind of stories that we do not hear through our media or much of other media. So, I mean, we need to become more media savvy into what voices we listen to and what news agencies we listen to, and to seek out, if we need to be, through other magazines and things like that, to find and hear some of the truth. I would expect also, too, that a lot of Muslims, besides not having a hierarchical structure like we have, we complain about bishops and the Pope, but there are some pluses to it, because they can speak as one voice for the community. But I would expect there's an analogy with the Catholic Church in our country during the Civil War. We didn't speak out against slavery because we were in the minority, and we were the ones who were looked down upon here. I would expect Muslims are afraid to speak out too loudly in our country because they're in the minority, and they're looked down upon by many of us, even unintentionally, because of all of the stereotypes. And there's stereotypes about us Catholics out there. It still holds. It's seeking out the truth. And I know in our country and in our parish here, there are a lot of folks who are suffering. And a lot of you are carrying very heavy crosses in your own families and among your friends and in this parish. But these are our sisters and brothers who are carrying even a heavy cross. The age of the martyrs is not the first couple centuries. We are living in one of the great age of martyrs around the world of Christians, not only in the Middle East, but in India, Pakistan, Myanmar. And it is Christians primarily, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we need to somehow support them. And whether it's with our prayers or supporting agencies such as Catholic Near East Welfare or Catholic Relief Services, I don't think most Catholics and most people understand the far-reaching work that the Catholic Church does around the world. And we do it quietly, unheralded, but Catholics also need to know that we are present in all of these situations. And we do it at low cost, which, versus what governments around the world, for some reason, can't figure out how to do things cheaply. But the fact that I wasn't here for it, but I expect you mentioned, sister, that children are being taught in the midst of war, that people are being healed in the midst of war, that the presence of good is there and will eventually, be victorious. That's what this Lent and Easter season is about. Christ has conquered sin and death. It's a done deal. We need to live it out. We need to live it out publicly and boldly. And no one's going to come up to us and put a gun to our head and say, are you a Christian or not? It's not the point. And it's not about trying to feel guilty what we're experiencing and have and they don't have. We are part of a large body, Paul says. And the ear cannot say to the eye, I don't need you. And the foot can't say to the hand, I don't need you. Our sisters and brothers need us. It's not even Catholics needing Catholics or Christians needing Catholics. Right now it's human beings who need other human beings to speak out boldly and firmly. So I'm very glad that Greg and Chris were able to come up from New York City for us to open a door, maybe more intimately, to what is going on and to perk our consciences and our interest in finding out. So go to their website. It's a really good website. Sign up with Chris for their magazine. I'm not getting a commission for the advertising. This comes out quarterly. It's really a fine magazine. I've been supporting Catholic Near East for many decades. And it's also opening to all of us a whole aspect of Eastern Christianity that most of us are unaware about. We know our own Western Catholicism and our Protestant sisters and brothers, but we don't know about the Orthodox and Eastern Catholic Christians. These are some of the oldest Christian communities on the face of the earth. And it's where our tradition was born, in the Middle East. We are not a Western religion. We are a Middle Eastern religion born in the deserts of Judea. So pray for them as you hear in our universal prayers often in our parish. I put that in. Support agencies of the Catholic Church and beyond our Catholic Church that are doing good work to help these people. So Greg, Chris, thank you again for being with us. Thank you for attending this morning from St. Mary's and St. Edward's. Tonight is is Taizé prayer at 7 o'clock. There's confessions from 5 to 6:30. There's exposition of the sacrament from 3 to 4. And tomorrow at 10 in the morning and at 7 at night, Amina Swad is going to be speaking to us on jail ministry. He is head chaplain for the Otsego jails. And so we look forward to see you maybe later on today and tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.